please welcome back to the show a voice from the abyss that I know that you guys haven't heard in a very long time. Episode number 27 to be exact, and now going on episode 405. I figured it was about time that I had a bit of an update from this guy. So please welcome back to the show, Paranoid American, comic book publisher. How's it going today, man?
It's going great, man. Yeah, the title was way longer. It's like Freemason, ex-military, ex-Disney, ex-Turner Network, MTV, / comic book publisher / conspiracy theorist aficionado, Salvia Divinorum advocate. That's the full title.
Last time we were on, I think we vaguely got a little bit into the Disney stuff. We got a little bit, I don't even remember, honestly, the extent of our full conversation last time, but I do remember the fact that you were one of those people that has such a list of titles that it all kind of plays into what you do with the comic books anyways, because that's ends up being what you've used for your influence to write this stuff anyway. So, you know, man of many titles.
It's how I exercise my demons, is like the comic book medium, which I've expanded into other mediums too, but like that was the one format that I felt I could get all my schizophrenic, random, tangential thoughts together in one place, and it wouldn't seem like a mental breakdown, essentially, right? Like putting it in a book, it would just be the craziest book. Putting it in almost any other media, I tried it in music. Comic books where like all of the weird conspiracy ideas I had nestled in my head, when they were on the page, it was like, okay, this actually helps me exercise these demons in a way that like nothing else was able to.
Dude, talking about weird ways that you're able to portray this art, I don't know if you're still doing it, but I remember for a while there, you were posting all these little, I guess you could say like figures and like little like dioramas and stuff like that of different stuff you were making. Yeah, those things were fantastic because some of them were like extremely dark concepts, but it's like you ended up doing them as like these little like kids package looking boxes. Like I think one of them you did was like Frazzle Drip or something like that. And again, it's like, what other medium would you be able to get away with that with and make it a joke? Because even if you made it like a normal action figure, like it's going to end up looking like an old Spawn or like an early 2000s action figure or something. It's going to end up being dark. So it's like, it's kind of cool you're able to play off these dark concepts to, I don't want to say normalize them, but at least kind of get them in some people's mindsets without, you know, going too dark with it where you start getting it pulled off of everything.
I've got some that have been on the line. So the one that you're talking about is the Super Predator playset with adrenochrome action. And it's got like a little reptilian Hillary Clinton and like a pantsuit. In like a base, like in a Comet ping pong basement. There's like a little ping pong in the background and pizza. And she's got like a grimoire and a severed head that lights up. And like she's got like a little butcher knife in her hand. But it looks so cute and adorable because it basically looks like a little Lego play set. And I find that making it have the same amount of polish that if you went to, you know, Walmart or Toys R Us or whatever, Toys R Us, I'm dating myself. That doesn't even exist anymore. But, you know, you
no,
go
it
to Target
still exists, but
section.
very, very small inside of what is that, Macy's or something like that? They get like
right,
a 20 foot by 20 foot area.
Like, in the new generation, who the hell even knows what Toys R Us even mean? But the premise is that you kind of got it. I think it's basically like a version of normalizing, but it's taking this really extreme topic that very taboo. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to know about it. You're supposed to ostracize people that mention it. But when it's a comic book or when it's a little toy, like, how do you get mad at that? What are you going to argue against the cute little toy that lights up, right? So that's kind of been the secret formula to kind of push it over the edge a little bit without getting kicked out. Now, there are some places I don't bring to conventions and I don't promote as heavily. Like I've got the I think like the police brutality play set, which is basically a reenactment of the George Floyd situation in front of like the little store. But that one I don't put at the front of the table, but it's in the catalog.
Dude, we'll have to come back to these little play sets because these things are hilarious to me. But at least kind of bringing it back a little bit before we get too far into that rabbit hole, considering that it's been so long since you've been on the show, I want to lay down the groundwork a little bit on what exactly Paranoid American is, what exactly you do over there, what exactly got you into the comic book stuff, and kind of let everybody know a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing over there.
So I started Paranoid American around 2012. And the whole reason, paranoidamerican.com, by the way, go right now, start adding things to your cart. But I started it. I had been working on this story, and I didn't know if it was going to be music or if it was going to be a game or something. I just knew that I had this thing that I was working on that was based in like satanic panic research and some of like the Franklin scandal research, very like in the weeds, deep, dark, like horrific kind of things. But and the whole plot was like, how do I get people that I know, my friends and my peers, to care about this Franklin scandal? That was literally like where it originally started. And then it slowly morphed into a comic book. And then I took the ideas of that comic, and it was all sketched out. Like I really felt like it had some legs to it. And I tried pitching it to animation companies because I was working at Disney at the time. So I had connections to other animators and other studios. I flew out to Burbank and I shopped it to like William Street, Adult Swim, Titmouse Animation, 5 Point Harness, like all these guys that were movers and shakers in like the early 2010s. And the overwhelming feedback I got was like, what is this? Get away from me, lose my number. Not in those words, but I could tell just by the reception that it was like, oh, this is not what I expected and not what I wanted. So long story short,
as great as the
I was
conspiracy shows are, they only feel like they last like 1 or 2 seasons if you're lucky anyways. But it's like they're like there was that one on Netflix they did recently. It was like
there was one called Inside Job that
yes, that one
made 2 seasons, I think, maybe.
Yeah, it's like you only get 2 seasons out of these shows, as great as they are, unfortunately.
Well, you know what it is that you have to have maybe a conspiracy themed episode in a show that otherwise is not hyper fixated on conspiracy. And I think that might be the magic sauce, like a Rick and Morty kind of thing. Like they can jump in, they can jump back out, and they can go into other little topics. I didn't learn that. I still haven't learned that lesson. So I hyper fixate on conspiracy theories and occult research and just sort of like taboo things in general, weird history from, American, like conspiracies and corruption. And when I was at Disney, I just wanted to turn that into what I was doing for the mouse, right? So if I was sitting at a computer animating Goofy for 2 months on some stupid project, in the back of my mind, it was like, I wish that I was animating, my characters, like this Franklin Scandal, CIA, Mockingbird, MK Ultra stuff. And over time, like at one point, I think I just had like a working lunch with a bunch of the animators that were on my team. And I was just like, hey, man, if I, give you $50 or $60, will you sketch this little idea that I had? And over time, that sketch turned into like a little mini comic. The mini comic turned into a full length comic. And I was like, all right, I did it. I did the one thing I wanted to make this comic. And I realized that I had so many other crazy ideas I needed to sort of exercise that I just made a series for every weird conspiracy sort of like theory that I've fully bought into. And each one of those comic lines to begin with was like my way of convincing other people to also see it that way. And I feel like that was just like the best medium for the time. So that's essentially where Paranoid American came from. It came from a bored Disney animator that was trying to convince his coworkers that, MK Ultra was real.
And actually, I think I do have that little tiny pamphlet that you made for MK Ultra, I think from last time we chatted. And for anybody who hasn't checked it out, it's absolutely fantastic. But going into some of the conspiracy stuff that you cover, as far as like all your comic books and everything goes, I know that you did that compilation where you covered a lot of the like 2000s and earlier conspiracies, but do you find yourself now that there's so much crazy stuff going on all the time, almost doing like, I don't want to say like political cartoons, but almost like these short cartoons of just making fun of all these concepts because it's just getting to the point where everything's just so ridiculous. It's like you can't help yourself but to just kind of jot your ideas down through art.
I honestly have a strong affinity to conspiracy theories that are at least 2 to 3 decades or older, right? Because I find that the modern ones, things that are like just pop, like to just come up with like a Charlie Kirk assassination or like the Trump assassination attempts. There's still so many people adding noise to the conversation. There's still so much to come out that I always feel like I don't want to lock in whatever my view is on something. Because to be honest, man, working on a comic book is an insane amount of time and money and effort. It's not just a quick meme. It's not a quick, like, let's record a little video and upload it. It's like here's what I'm going to be doing for the next 8 to 12 to 14 months, and I'm going to drop 3 to 7 grand into it. So a lot of the time it's like I want to make sure that I can have like the most comprehensive take on it. Like the little MK Ultra comic you mentioned, I've got a couple others now that this one came out since the last time we talked, but now I'm doing full color, but it's the same format. And this one is the Are You Under Illuminati Mind Control? This is the Illuminati comic. And for example, this one is the most comprehensive illustrated breakdown of the Bavarian Illuminati that I think has ever been created. Hopefully in my lifetime, the only one that'll be that comprehensive. And I feel like that's now my new goal, is like, if I'm going to do a comic about something, I want it to encompass like all the mainstream facts, all of the weird little trivia things that you've never heard before, and then things that you guaranteed haven't heard unless you've read like every damn book in every crusty old bookshop about it. So that's like my new focus, is to be like fully comprehensive.
Dude, and you brought up the fact that, of course, you were a Freemason at one point. I don't know if you still currently are, but
I pay my dues, but I haven't been to lodge in probably 10 years.
Well, I mean, I was going to say the good part about that is, you know, everybody wants to have their opinion on like the Freemasons. And as far as I've kind of dived in with like my occult research with all this type of
We're
stuff.
evil. We kidnap kids. I mean, it's out in the open. They've exposed us many times.
Yeah, I was going to say the Freemasons, it's like out of any group, it's like they're mainly this one that kind of has this thing going on where it's like, oh, we just want to be the best possible men that we could be, blah, 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 blah. But we have this like specific group within that group, of course, like how most work, where, you know, it's not even necessarily the Freemasons. It's mainly just there's somebody that's kind of compiled a little bit of everywhere. But the cool part about it is, at least with some of like the teachings and understandings, you kind of have this like different perspective on things. So, you know, when you're able to like interpret stuff through your art, I know that a lot of people probably have this whole thing where they're like, oh, he's probably hiding secret stuff in his artwork and he's trying to actually work for the other group.
Of course I am. Why
of course,
wouldn't
everybody is going to call you a psyop, but it's like people also have a hard time getting that concept that sometimes, you know, in order to, you know, understand what the enemy's trying to say, sometimes you have to kind of speak their lingo a little bit. So, you know, with a little bit of that Freemason training / understanding of some of these occult different concepts of philosophy, if anything, it makes it so you can portray the ideas a little bit easier, and makes it so that you can probably portray them to a different audience in a little bit easier of a way that isn't intended to be hidden. So it's like, you know, people can call you a psyop all they want, but realistically, the only people that are going to be able to present the information properly are people that have had some type of tie to the understanding of the information.
Well, so I like to just wonder, like, at my own little mental game, but it's like, let's say that I am a psyop, or someone's like, oh, this guy's, you know, planting secret information, or he's brainwashing people. Is that because of the Freemason thing? Is it because of the military service? Is it because I worked at Disney for 10 years? Is it because I worked for Turner Networks, MTV, VH1, Adult Swim? Like, which one of those? Because all of those are highly suspect. If someone was like, I worked at Disney for 10 years, you know, working on animation, it's like, oh, you were probably putting brainwashing into whatever you were working on that went out into the world. Like, yeah, pick a card, I guess. So if someone wants to be angry about the Freemason angle, there's probably someone else out there that couldn't care less, but they're like, what? He was, you know, ex-military, top secret SCI? That's suspect. InfoSec? That's suspect.
So also kind of bringing it back onto this idea of Adult Swim also, because I don't know if I've ever actually talked about this on the show, but of course everybody who watches Adult Swim knows that there's all these like little weird concepts they try to hide within the cartoons and everything like that. But at least coming from somebody that worked there, what's kind of like the scoop, I guess you could say, on like Adult Swim? Like, you know, is there people in the know? Like, is there information intentionally being pushed? Like, is it just people goofing around? Like what's the down low, at least from your perspective, on Adult Swim?
I think it's a little bit of everything, and to be clear, like the way that Adult Swim works, William Street, is that they just kind of acquire a show that was made by another production house. So like Titmouse and the 5 Point Harness, those would be the places where it's actually created, and then it gets, you know, licensed out to Adult Swim for however long and goes through their network. So like in those little animation shops, they're clicky, but I mean, artists are typically pretty like open-minded to a bunch of stuff. Even in Disney, the main animators and the illustrators that worked at Disney, you might expect like, oh, everyone's all clear cut and, you know, they're going to be super straight edge and Mormon because it's Disney. That's never been the case, man. Like even if you go back to the OG Disney animations, like 1930s, 1940s, these guys, when they weren't drawing children's cartoons, they were drawing pinups. and they were drawing, like women with missiles on the side of like, war planes, and they were getting sent overseas to kill Nazis and getting body counts, and then coming back to the States and then finishing the children's cartoon, right? So it's like that. And the main difference now at Adult Swim or at Disney, whatever, is that you maybe don't have like war criminals, people that have like body counts that you're working next to, but the depth of people and the type of things that they might be interested in, it fills the entire gamut. So it's really hard to pin down, although I would say that by default most people do have to act like they are both liberal and like a conservative liberal, essentially, until the bosses go home and the suits go home and you kind of build some rapport with your team. That's when you start realizing, like, okay, who here thinks that 9/11 was an inside job? Who here thinks that Bigfoot is real? But you can't, like, you never want to open that up on like day one or week one. You know what I mean?
See, the hard part with well, everybody kind of knows the backing with Disney, and I know that last time you came on the show, you said that at least from like you working there, you didn't really see any of this like weird background or anything with Disney. But of course, if there was anything weird going on, nobody would really know about it, and if they did, it wouldn't be until years later. But specifically, Cartoon Network / Adult Swim, whatever you want to kind of expand on. I don't know how much validity there is to it, but it seems like it lines up pretty well as far as like the conspiracy theory behind like Courage the Cowardly Dog, for example, that it was supposed to be this like MK Ultra like psyop, or it was supposed to like educate people on different profiles of drugs and everything like that. And there's all these different cartoons they were claiming during the 90s were actually government funded, and they were actually intended to try to portray different ideas, blah, blah, blah. Most of them are all like Cartoon Network cartoons, which was like the fascinating part about it. So ironically, like, it wouldn't seem too far off to me if it was like, all right, this was our target audience back then, and now those same people are the ones that are getting high at night and watching cartoons. So, whatever messages we have to try to put in their minds, like, let's continue to push that into their minds. And I mean, part of the funny thing about the whole psyop concept is, everybody wants to say every conspiracy podcaster is a psyop, or anybody that was a Freemason was a psyop, or anything like that. But, realistically, the psyop, I feel like, has gotten so complex that if anybody is a psyop, they're not really aware that they're a psyop until it's too late. And once they are aware that they're a psyop, generally, what ends up happening to them is they get disappeared. So, I mean,
yeah, as long as I'm not disappeared, then at least I'm like still a psyop in training. And I haven't heard that about Courage the Cowardly Dog, but I know what cartoon you're talking about. And I've also 100%, not only my own ideas that I had pitched to networks and animation teams, but I've seen, like, from the other side, working at Disney, having people come and, because a lot of people don't realize that even working at Disney, at least the post-production shop I worked at, we could take outside work. So, like, for example, the guy that created Boondock Saints, like, he would come over to the studio and we would work on like games and animations and stuff for Boondock Saints. Like, that's not Touchstone, that's not Disney. It's just that, like, we would offer our services to all these other outside sort of studios. So you get to work on way more things than whatever the studio you're working at is usually consolidated to.
And also too, you're still kind of, in a weird way, kind of working on cartoons, well, working on your own stuff, of course, but knowing, I guess, somewhat of the background that as far as like how these cartoon studios and everything like that work, I feel like it's probably been a little bit since you worked at one of these studios, but I'm assuming that probably when you worked at it was pre-COVID, pre all this like woke influence, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I left in
in
2016 was when I left Disney, and that's the last time that I worked for another studio.
So I guess going into like today's perspective on things, as far as like all the wokeness and all that kind of stuff that's coming out in a lot of these cartoons and everything like that, do you think that it's actually a result of any of these artists, or do you think that the artists are actually trying to fight against this type of stuff and it's just a matter of like the big studios that are trying to push this stuff in?
I think that there's not a lot of fighting back from the artists, because that's literally their job. They're there to do that. So, and it's also such a small little community that if you get kicked off a team because you didn't like the project, whatever, you're just going to be seen as someone that's difficult to work with. And now in this very small community of, animators and illustrators in the industry, you might just become persona non grata. So half of what happens is that you either have to train yourself to just not care about whatever agenda, whatever woke crap they're trying to pile in, or over time, you just slowly acclimate to it, and it just becomes part of your belief system, or at least like part of the things that you accept and you're okay with. Like I'll give you a really great example of this one. It still blows my mind. So I just mentioned that we worked for the guy that made Boondock Saints on a couple projects, right? Fairly violent movie. Like the main scenes in that movie is just like gunfight. It was a firefight. And they're like shooting guns in all directions, right? Like these like vigilantes that are out getting like justice. Well, the head of that studio also turned down a documentary on the Second Amendment that someone wanted to pay us to do, and it was like, no, I don't believe in, you know, gun rights. In fact, the guy running the studio believed in gun control, so it was like, no, we're absolutely not going to do a Second Amendment documentary. Oh, my friend that did Boondock Saints wants to do something. Yeah, have him come over. Let's do a brainstorm. So it's like, you're for guns, but you're against guns. So that was just like one of these like examples. And then another one too that I've seen that's kind of like similar to that Courage the Cowardly Dog is that the original premise has some bite to it. It has like some true dark adult kind of aspect to it. And just after it goes through enough rounds of iteration, it gets softened on each iteration. And then after about 20 creative sessions, all that bite is completely gone. And now it's like, how do we sell BK Nights, and how do we sell you know, like fruit roll-ups or whatever to the people watching this? And if you're trying to instruct them about MK Ultra and drugs and all this, like, you're losing the plot. Like, hey, we're here to sell, you know, candy and toys. Like, so that's essentially what it comes down to when you're working at least like the bigger studios. So like it'll start out with these guys, like for example, the original pilot for Rick and Morty. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, I don't know if I've actually ever seen that original pilot. But
So
I'm
the
sure
original pilot
totally
for Rick
different.
and Morty, the entire gag is that it's Back to the Future, and that Doc is molesting Marty, and that they've got this very unhealthy, toxic relationship where, you know, Doc is having Marty come over and do these like experiments. Come on, Marty, we're gonna do an experiment. But really the premise is like he's molesting this child. And that was the entire gag of Rick and Morty. But after it got picked up and it's like, okay, let's turn this into a serialized show. Obviously, you can't do like a major network version of old man molests child over and over again. But if you go, I'm telling you, if you go back and just search for the original pilot for Rick and Morty, that is 100% what the entire show was based on. But as you can see, it keeps the same sort of soul, right? But they change what it was about. I don't know if that's an attack of like, oh, it's, you know, Rick and Morty wasn't woke enough. I don't know if there needs to be a cartoon, you know, on prime time about an old man molesting a child over and over again. But it's just a tiny example that's kind of similar to the Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Well, I mean, even going back to like the Boondock Saints thing, the whole like premise of Boondock Saints from the guy that wrote the show was basically it was supposed to be like a mirror of like black culture to basically show like how ridiculous things have gotten. And it was supposed to like basically turn people away from acting like complete, you know, like idiots like the people were on the show. But ironically, it was at that time where it was like the culture was really, really shifting. Like hip hop was like really, really taking off and everything like that. And his show that he had this like wholesome purpose of trying to create ended up becoming this whole show that ended up like becoming part of the culture to the point where people thought it was hilarious to do the crazy ignorant stuff that was in the show. And even like you were kind of mentioning the whole like gun scene shootout thing that's in the movie and everything like that. Like, you know, the whole premise of it was supposed to be showing how ridiculous that type of stuff was, but it ended up turning into like part of the culture. So it's like even the guy that wrote that show, he almost got like psyoped by his own show that they were like, yeah, no problem, we can do this show, we'll have wholesome reasoning behind it. And then by the time there are 3 seasons in, he's like, my fucking show just got away from me.
Oh, dude,
nobody even knows about him talking about that. There's like a handful of interviews where he's getting like mad about people not getting his show, but for the most part everybody forgot about that.
It's funny you mentioned him because Aaron McRuder, I actually had a chance when I was pitching. It was the premise was time samplers, which would turn into a comic eventually, but originally it was going to be an animated series, and that was one of the series that I was trying to pitch to these studios. and it was not being received well. And one of the guys that I met with, they were all with Klasky Supo, was a bunch of old ex-animators, and some with Roman films. So Klasky Supo was All Real Monsters, Rugrats, like a whole bunch of early Nicktoons that were on Nickelodeon in like the 90s. And then Film Roman is The Simpsons, and a handful of other like larger productions. So anyways, these guys got me in contact with Aaron McGruder, and I actually got to have like an hour-long phone call with Aaron McGruder to pitch my conspiracy theory, comic idea. Him and also Donick Cary, who was a writer on The Simpsons. So anyways, the feedback that I got from Aaron McGruder and from Donick Cary both kind of were the same thing. And it was like, look, man, like no matter how cool your idea is, a lot of the studios and the networks and the audience, when they see cartoons, they're thinking, oh, this is going to be funny and I'm going to laugh. So when you come at it like, okay, my comic or my animation's about these MK Ultra victims that were, horrifically tortured and trauma-based programming and all this, is like, whoa. It's like, okay, where's the funny? That was like the thing that kept coming up. So that's kind of what I think ends up softening the corners originally. And that's kind of what Aaron McGruder too, is that he started out and it was like funny, but it was funny in like a biting social commentary way. But once it actually becomes animated and cartoon and mainstream, now it's like, okay, people actually need to laugh. We need to be like silly and zany, and it kind of gets away from you. You know what I mean? Because now you're chasing a like the demographic versus what the original inspiration for the thing was.
It's almost kind of like Spawn. Like that's one of those like amazing
perfect example.
Like,
the only two examples that I could come up with at the time where it was like, wait, not every cartoon has to be funny. It was Spawn and the Max, and maybe like The Head or Aeon Flux or something. Anything was like on Liquid TV or on MTV's Oddities back in the day. But that's it, man. There's almost no other great examples aside from like He-Man, G.I. Joe, but those are like in a different demo. That was like 80s, 90s toy commercials versus 2000s animated series.
So the only thing that Spawn has that I will say as far as like comic book stuff, like it does have some comic relief. Like you do have the Violator, where like as twisted as the situations get, like he comes in and says some like funny twisted shit, but it's like even what he says is still twisted. So it's like it doesn't really have that full comic book like effect to it. I mean that full comedy effect to it, but I mean, that's one of those weird cartoons that I feel like didn't get nearly as much credit for how amazing it truly was, just because of the fact that, again, it didn't have that comic relief probably through most of it when people were expecting that from, that generation of cartoons.
It was phenomenal, and even at the time, it was not popular. You know what I mean? Like, not a lot of people were watching. And the Spawn was on HBO, too, which was unheard of. Like, it was truly an adult animated cartoon. The Max,
well, there was tits in the first like episode or two, if I'm not mistaken. Like,
yeah, I mean, and you can almost count on one hand the types of animated. So like you've got your Ralph Bashki's like Coonskin and Cool World kind of angles that were like serious cartoons, right? But there's not Bill Plimpton, but there's not a lot of other ones that broke that mold of like silly cartoon has to be funny.
Well, I guess kind of starting to shift stuff up a little bit. I do want to get into some of the MK Ultra stuff and some of the connections in with some of this cartoon stuff. As far as like your research and everything like that goes, have you found anything solid as far as like non-conspiratorial MK Ultra programming as far as like cartoons or television goes, where it's not, a conspiracy theory, but there's actually been some like solid fact to it that you've tried to, mention through any of your comic books or anything?
So this is like very tangential to conspiracy theory, but it fits into the whole like programming thing. And this was a weird tangent that I went down. Don't freaking judge me, okay? But this was like at one point we were doing, because I have a podcast called Occult Disney where we watch every single theatrical release of animated Disney movies, and we started at Snow White in the 1930s, and I think we're around Lightyear, so like we're in the 2010s, 2016 or so. So we've made the way all the way there. But anyways, when we were watching Rescuers, and then also, or The Great Mouse Detective was one that had like a very saucy scene with like a can dancer slash stripper that was drawn like a voluptuous stripper for children in this cartoon. And then when we watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is technically a Disney release, Touchstone, I think, but there's this.
They had some weird thing with licensing where it was like, it wasn't Disney and it wasn't Warner Brothers, but they had some like contract where they basically said like, all right, we'll let you use these characters as long as Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse are on the screen equally. So they had that whole scene where they were like falling in the sky and they tried to give them exact amounts of screen time and like talking throughout that scene so that they would be able to use all those characters for that movie.
100%.
It's like a weird premise.
Imagine if like Coca-Cola and Pepsi decided to come out with like a soda that had a little bit of each in it, right? It's something that doesn't normally happen. So Who Framed Roger Rabbit truly stands out as a complete anomaly when like different competing companies were like, let's collaborate on this thing. I'm so glad it exists. But there's a
and mixing it
scene
into real world too. That was like a whole other weird thing at the time. So it's like 3 things ahead of its time.
What was that?
Like mixing the real world in with like the comic
the way
book
they
art
did
style.
it too, yeah.
Yeah.
So Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The reason I bring this one up as an example is because the theatrical release had a couple of things in it that never made it onto a wide release, like like VHS and DVD and everything. One of them is the very beginning had this baby that was like a cute little baby in the cartoon, but then when the cameras stopped rolling, he's got like a cigar and he's got like a real raspy voice and he's like, hey toots, and he's like slapping women on the ass and he like walks under a lady with a dress and looks up and like comments on what he sees, and like it gets very raunchy in the first like 5 minutes. And then later on, towards the end of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, there was a scene when they're flying out of a tunnel in a car and the car like tumbles and Jessica Rabbit falls out of the car, and there's like a frame that like basically had to be edited out and then was reintroduced later as like the uncut version of this. The basically like her legs spread as she's falling out of the car, and the animators drew pretty detailed version of what that would look like, thinking that either they were going to get it past, or the conspiracy theory here is that they created it just so that they could remove it, just so that they could re-release it as like an uncut thing, so that they'd have like 3 different versions that they could schlock to people. Anyways, the rabbit hole that sent me down was like, what makes a human being attracted to a cartoon character? Like, how does that even work? Like, what part of our brain is like, I see an illustration on the screen or on paper, and now it's changing physiological response right now? Like, what mechanism is that? So the deep dive research I went into is something called supernormal stimulus. And the really fascinating part of this is that the exact same premise of why someone might find a cartoon character attractive, pin-up art and all this stuff, even old paintings, Rubenesque paintings where people would like, oh my God, that's pornography, like back in the day, right? The reason that you get attracted to that, this supernormal stimulus, the scientific experiment, they did it on birds. So there's a certain type of bird that lays an egg, and the egg is blue with like spots all over it. And the scientific experiment was they just took like a piece of styrofoam and they painted it an even brighter blue color than this egg and put the spots on it and all that. And they were able to successfully over and over again get the mother birds to abandon their own eggs and then go and sit on this piece of styrofoam because it was a little bit bluer and it was a little bit, had like more spots on it. It was just more attractive. It looked kind of like their egg, but it was more appealing to them. And they would literally leave their egg. The egg would die, they wouldn't incubate the egg anymore. And then they would just sit on this piece of styrofoam. So then they were like, well, let's just make it not even the same shape. Let's just make it like, obviously not an egg shape, and just keep the color and keep the spots, and it still worked. So over enough time, they realized they can get a mother to abandon raising its child, and the child dies, the egg, just because the artificial version they made just like accentuated all the things that were flipping switches in their brain that said, let me go and like sit on that thing. And that is literally the exact same mechanism, the supernormal stimulus, that causes people to be attracted to cartoon characters. It's also the same thing that if you see like a burger in a commercial even though you know that thing is freaking fake. It's plastic, it's airbrushed, right? And they've like sprayed glue on it to make it look a certain way. Even knowing that, it bypasses all that logic and is just like, now that's a freaking burger. And you can apply this to so many, like the reason that candy paint cars exist is because it attracts people to blood. I can extend on that, but it's all this same premise of a supernormal stimulus.
Dude, that's almost kind of fascinating though when you get into like the whole concept of one, the whole Rosicrucian concept of trying to like put this information into people's heads so that they can kind of do what they want with it later on, and even going into even the whole aspect of like eugenics, like population type control. Because if you're getting a whole generation of people that are like overly sexualized by cartoon characters, I mean, you end up with almost like the current state of how people are now, where you have all these guys that are like, you know, really, really into like the cosplay girls, you know, they're really into those like hentai pillows and all that kind of shit. And once guys are too far into that stuff, it's like, they're not really concerned with going out and repopulating. And now you add VR porn into it. And now it's like, what are these guys going to do? You end up with the same problem that you got going on in Japan right now, where nobody's repopulating because they're like, why am I going to impregnate somebody when I can have any anime girl I want in the next 5 minutes? So it's like, this kind of seems like it may have been something that was like a long-term goal that started being normalized weirdly enough around the same time that the whole free love concept was starting. Like, you know, if they were already starting to kind of normalize that around that time, they're like, all right, we know what the inevitable possibility is of this. So if we can push people away from the overpopulation, then, you know, we can still satisfy the same urges. And then we don't actually have to have people really having that real intercourse anymore, which seems to be like the real ploy with a lot of this stuff is they try to trick people into this whole thing where they lose like that true connection with what the actual thing is, and then they get so fixated on the synthetic version of it that they lose why they were even drawn to the original thing in the first place. Like, this is almost like the state of tobacco, cannabis, sexuality in general. Like, this is like a long-term ploy that I feel like there's probably a lot of different things you could look into, and they'll probably sideline this stuff almost exactly.
Well, the key word that you just said there was synthetic, because I think that when you say synthetic, there's going to be the person that made it that gets paid. There's the middleman that sells it that gets paid. Like, synthetic means business. Someone's making money off this. So the opposite of that, like the organic version, like just go out and meet somebody and or, you know, just go out, like grow your own food or grow your own drugs or whatever it is, right? Those versions don't necessarily spur the economy. They don't create, you know, wealth for someone that wants to sell you a product. So that's part of the reason. The longer the time goes on, the less I think I'm convinced that there's like a little group or a cabal of people that are like, this is how we need to train the population, and here's our end goal is going to be to depopulate them, and here's how we're going to do it, step A, B, and C. I think it's more like, wow, we found this really easy, like shortcut, you know, cheat workaround that will guarantee for someone to buy our product, and we can just keep doing it over and over again, and society be damned. Like, who cares what the long-term ramifications are? I'm worried about Q1 profits, or I'm worried about Q4 profits, right? I think that it's probably more of that and more apathy towards who the hell cares how this pans out in the long run. Like, for example, there's the old this old experiment where a monkey or a bird or whatever, like animal, if they just hit a little lever, they'd get like a dose of cocaine or something. And they realized that on a long enough timeline, most animals would get to the point where they just keep hitting the lever over and over again. And they keep getting cocaine, where they won't drink water and they won't eat food and they won't exercise and they won't socialize with other animals. They'll just keep getting that dopamine response over and over again until they die from it. Their heart will just explode. And I think that that's an extreme version, but it's also like this supernormal stimulus or the synthetics that you're mentioning is just such an easy way to just hit that lever. And there's no one that's like, hey, maybe we should stop Shayn from hitting the lever again, because someone's like, bro, every time Shayn hits that lever, I get $20. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's just let him cook for a little while. If his heart explodes, whatever, someone in line behind him.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like a double ploy to this thing then, because you have the people that obviously are trying to make money, and then you have those people that have so much money that it just becomes this like point of power. So now you almost kind of have this escalating thing where it's like you have this one person that has this philosophy, then everybody else that's underneath them is basically just getting paid to make that philosophy happen. And unfortunately, like you said, it's like a house of cards that you have like one psycho in charge, and then everybody else is just trying to get their payday. And unfortunately, the guy up at the top who, you know, is way above the payday, you know, he's trying to push whatever information he's trying to push, and everybody else is just getting fucked in the process of it. And with the process of that, it's like almost everybody that's underneath him that's trying to push their work out, all of their work is now tainted because nobody can trust anything that they're doing anymore because it all comes back to profit. And now we end up in this society that we live in now where it's like nobody trusts anybody because everybody's just out for profit. Everybody's trying to steal your information. Everybody's trying to clock every single thing that you're doing. And even expanding into just even like some of these like rewards apps, like our big dumb mouth was talking about the like McDonald's rewards app or something like that recently, that there's all this like geo tracking happening where it's like guessing what you're going to be doing in the future and everything like that. And it's like, if you realize that this is like a long-term ploy that's been happening forever, that we're pushing people into feeling certain ways through social media, and that, you know, a lot of this MK Ultra type stuff is all is simply just marketing. Like the whole concept becomes a lot more scary because it's a lot more prevalent, but at the same time though, it's like a lot less scary because it's like, you know, it may not always be these dark powers that be, but rather people, again, just trying to make a profit, which is still scary, but a lot less scary than somebody trying to completely like depopulate you.
It's hard to separate the two. Like here's another really good example. If and this is maybe slightly after official MK Ultra ended. I don't believe it ever really ended, so it's just a continuation. Of course, right? I mean, I'm sure that you're of the same opinion, but I feel that a lot of people think MK Ultra and they are either imagining Men in Black, CIA agents, maybe guys in lab coats doing experiments and stuff. A large portion of MK Ultra was also just like marketing guys, like Madison Avenue, Mad Men style Don Draper. For example, Edward Lansdale, who was pivotal, I think, in the Phoenix program that went over to Vietnam and a few other places. He literally came from Madison Avenue. He was a Madison Avenue, like executive, Don Draper kind of guy that was advanced in making ad campaigns and selling people on stuff. And the military employs Edward Lansdale to basically run ad campaigns in war zones. And one of the most famous examples from Edward Lansdale is that they were in the Philippines, I believe, and the Philippines believe in this vampiric entity called an aswang. And or I like to call it an asswang just because it's funnier to say. So he realizes that there's this folklore about these vampiric creatures that will bite you in the neck and drain you of all your blood. So what he would do is they would go and find a poor victim somewhere. They would puncture their neck. They would drain all the blood out of their body, and then they would go and put it somewhere where the locals would come across it and find it. And they would put two and two together. They'd be like, oh my God, neck puncture. They don't have blood in their body. This is clearly an aswang, right? This was an Oswang sort of attack. So he knew that by doing that, now all of a sudden that entire community is at unrest because now they feel like not only are they at war politically, but they also have like supernatural entities that they're at war with and are causing like actual harm to their community. So that creation, he also would do the evil all-seeing eye. He would just paint like the big evil eye on the side of somebody's building somewhere, in the side of like their house. And again, they'd come across it and be like, oh my God, our community is being cursed. We've got these supernatural entities. And all it is just breaking their resolve down more and more to the point where they could be easily overrun because they're fighting, you know, so many different fronts, essentially. They're scatterbrained. So this is an example of like the military doing psychological warfare as a true psyop operation. But the originator was a guy from Madison Avenue. It was the guy that was making Coca-Cola commercials.
Going into even like broader concept of this, man, I'm pretty convinced that the majority of the occult is simply just this mass understanding of psychology. And that's where like the scary part is about like, oh, these people are mind controlling people, these people are doing this, is because once you get to such a deep point of philosophical understanding of how the human psyche actually works, you can basically manipulate people to do whatever you want. And that's where you start getting into like even like the ancient Babylonian mind splitting and like the people with like satanic ritual abuse. It's like, of course, there's like the ritualistic side of that, but the other perspective of that is basically it's just another form of mind control that they're trying to see like what way that they can bend these people to be able to do whatever jobs that they're ushering them to do. So it's like even within this philosophy, man, it's like you can perceive it as, of course it's something dark all around, but you can perceive it as something that's like otherworldly dark, or like they're making contact with other beings. Or on the other side, it's simply just dark and everybody has this like shroud of mystery around it because it's horrifying that these people have such an understanding of the human psyche that they can basically just manipulate anybody to do anything that they could possibly want them to do, which is again why, the whole concept of MK Ultra is so horrifying to everybody, is because, it's always been kind of addressed as like, oh, they're mimicking you to be able to do, whatever they could possibly want you to do. But, it's a little bit more than that. I feel like the end goal of MK Ultra is basically to be able to completely control somebody without them even being aware of any of it. And I feel like we've kind of gotten to that point now because a lot of these like mass shootings, all these like psyops, it's always people that are talking to a group of people on the internet. They're not really linked to anybody directly. So it's like, this is the continuation of MK Ultra. It's just a matter of knowing how to bend the mind so that people aren't aware of the fact that their mind is being bent.
I mean, I see MK Ultra as sort of like an indexing program where the military just went out and said, look, we want to know all the ways that you can control somebody's mind, either physically, through drugs, psychologically, hypnosis, whatever. We want to know every single option that is in our toolbox. And the end of MK Ultra was basically just a full index of, okay, here's all the experiments, here's all the drugs, here's all the ways that you can torture someone, talk to someone. And then the ultimate goal, since it was a military project, was like, okay, now how do we weaponize this? How do we make this into a military strategy, and either like hurt people or protect people or whatever? But MK Ultra was basically like a huge handbook of here's all the things that you can do. The same way that, I don't know if you're familiar with NLP, like neuro linguistic programming, which kind of became big in like the 70s, 80s, and then petered out closer to the 90s. It was the exact same premise, except the aim of NLP was either self-help / therapy or sales. So now instead of being in like a militarized, weaponized context, it's the same techniques, but now it's like, how do I sell you an expensive horsehair bed? Or how do I get you to like, buy a used car? That would be a huge market for NLP. Or some of it would be like, how do I get you to get over some weird hang up or phobia that you've got, which kind of borders on hypnosis. The point here being is that MK Ultra, in my view at this point, it's not like they sat down and invented new things and new techniques and here's how you mind control. They just figured out how it's always worked, and they figured out how to break that into a formula that could be repeated and then put into a manual and then given to someone in the field and be like, follow steps 1 through 9 to get your subject to do whatever you want to do. And it's not like it works on every single person, but prior to MK Ultra, that manual and that formula and that handbook didn't even exist, which also meant we didn't have a way to identify when it was happening to us. So it's like both an offensive and a defensive thing. But MK Ultra since then, I think has now it's everywhere. It's not like it's just military. And I mean, children know how to do NLP techniques and MK Ultra techniques because they learn it through movies and TV, right? So it's
you walk into a grocery store and it's all a trick in order to make you buy certain things and walk through certain areas. It's like everything.
Yeah, it's impossible for me now to separate like the colors that restaurants use to spur your appetite versus MK Ultra. Like it all is part
right?
of the exact. It's how do you influence the human mind to do something that it otherwise wouldn't have, or at least improve the suggestibility to nudge you in a certain way.
So this might open up a whole can of worms, but I feel like you might be the right guy to talk about this with for at least a little bit of time that we do have left. So everybody always kind of gets into this whole idea about, since we're already kind of on the vein of MK Ultra, the whole idea about you were kind of bringing it up that some of these marketing geniuses, some of these businessmen, they're almost kind of like on the precipice of being like psychopathic as far as like their nature goes. So then you kind of expand out a little bit to like some of these elites and like their interest in some of these like psychos, such as, having like a that figure of like the Jeffrey Dahmer, body and stuff like that in your house, or just like all this kind of like weird art that's like related to these like psychopaths. And then you start kind of linking the fact that the end verdict of some of this MK Ultra might actually be these psychopathic traits, or these psychopathic traits, if they're put in the right setting, you can basically extend them into being a point of MK Ultra programming. So this whole connection on this thing, like, what's kind of your belief as far as the MK Ultra connection goes with some of these like serial killers? Because at least from like some of my research, it seems like almost every single mass serial killer you can connect to almost some weird facet of MK Ultra. And on the back end of that, you're also able to connect it in with some of this like weird backing where like this law was changed to make things easier for this police department, or this was changed because now we can surveil people in this instance. So I kind of feel like these broad serial killer concepts, and the reason why you see how these elites almost like glorifying these serial killers without being completely direct about it, is because they may have been some of these like almost like persona prodigy type MK Ultra projects that worked out exactly how they wanted to. So it's almost like this is like their masterpiece of art essentially. And all of this is actually linked into the continuation of MK Ultra programming, which could again further into all of these mass shootings and people just going crazy and snapping nowadays, and why people can't make it to those big ass numbers anymore. But it's almost like the programming's working, and these were the things that they idolized because these were like the past instances where they did work.
I think it might even be more of a two-way street where it's not like every single serial killer had some root in MK Ultra. It would be if they didn't have some sort of root in MK Ultra, you can be sure that MK Ultra or whatever the continuation of that would be, that they're like, oh, how do we make one of those? You know what I mean? Like, wow.
Talk about Babylonian programming, the whole Dennis Rader thing, that he could be like at a church and hanging out with his family, and then the next 10 minutes later he's in somebody's house tying him up and raping him. Like that's some like straight like sexual or satanic ritual abuse trauma right there.
I legitimately believe that that's possible, and I know that like in the normie world that's crazy, that's movie, comic book, conspiracy theory stuff. But the more you look into it, man, the possibility of being able to hypnotize someone, just like stage magicians, there's so many examples where people are willing to go into that suggestive state enough that they can be implanted with instructions to do things. And just at the stage level, this is happening within like a 2-hour period. If you're talking about the military, where they can just straight up kidnap you and give you drugs and torture you and do things that normal stage magicians are not allowed to do because they would go to jail. Well, the military doesn't have to abide by that. So now,
those could be some of the alien abductions. I've been throwing this for a while, man. I think MK Ultra and some of these alien abductions are linked for that exact reason.
well, again, it will be hard to separate the two because most of the alien abductions that you get reports on, they sound like traumatic experiences, right? There's not a lot of them where it's like, yeah, they took me to Disney World and we rode some rides and it was great and I came back down. It's always like something that changes you for the worse, essentially, over time. And I think that it would be really easy to put somebody into a state, through trauma, and now you can replace like whatever horrific things are happening with something else because your mind already wants to escape. It already wants to be like, this isn't happening, something else is happening. So if you have the right formula that can just stick the little substitutions in, that now you can come out of the other end of that thinking you either had a religious experience or you were probed by aliens or anything other than the thing that actually happened. This is actually fairly easy to do, which was well documented many times in the MK Ultra program. The other big ones are like, can you just straight up wipe someone's memory? You sure can. If you look at like Donald Ewan Cameron and his psychic driving and the use of basically induced comas and LSD, and playing the psychic driving was like you play the same message over and over again in headphones for like days, months, weeks. So those versions were proven like in an actual scientific experiment. You can show it is 100% possible to erase somebody's brain. So all of these different elements in isolation exist in MK Ultra. It's just that, okay, now let's stitch those all together. That's where the conspiracy theory of like Sirhan comes up, essentially, like RFK assassination, John Lennon assassination. Anytime Catcher in the Rye comes up, all of the SSRI induced like school shootings, they're all could potentially be continuations of just discoveries that were made during MK Ultra. But I don't think that necessarily means that every serial killer school shooter was a military operation, but they are sort of birthed out of that original MK Ultra.
Or, I mean, even just like useful guinea pigs in a certain way. Like, they know the premise of what's going to line up and what's going to be these, driving factors for certain individuals that they know that they might be able to use or influence in specific ways. Like, even going into the Dennis Rader thing, what kicked off most of his interest in all of the weird bondage stuff was the fact that he saw his mom's hand get like trapped in a couch or something like that when he was a kid. So it's like, if they're able to document, these certain things might end up causing this specific thing, then you start getting into like the tech age now, where it's like, they were doing MK Ultra back in the day and documenting this stuff, as you were mentioning, but now they have the documentation of what lines up to what, and now they have all of this traffic of people looking up these specific things, or people looking up why this experience happened to me, or this specific thing. So now it's almost like you could use like a database of the interest that people are looking up, these different experiences that people have that tick the boxes with certain things that they know they might be able to use for specific programming. And then this goes back into my earlier point where it's like, it's not that hard to just give somebody like a couple little pushes here and there to make it so that they're able to do something crazy to usher something else in. Like, there was one recently in Michigan, I think it was like about a year and a half ago or something like that. There's some kid talking to, quote, ISIS online, some terrorist organization. He was going to go and bomb some place or something like that. Come to find out, the people he was talking to online were like FBI agents and everything like that. And of course, they swooped in and saved the day. And they were like, oh, they stopped an ISIS attack. But it's like, all right, so the information that I'm getting from this is this kid was talking to random people online. The random people were the U.S. government. The U.S. government gave him the information on how to do this act. And then all of a sudden they swooped in and they stopped him from doing it and played the hero. And it's like, I don't know, that sounds a little fishy here. That almost kind of sounds like it was like an intentional ploy so that they could swoop in and be the hero. And then it goes, like what's the extent of this? Like what could be the inevitable possibility behind this? Like, could this be some of the stuff that plays in with the Charlie Kirk shooting, for example? The guy that's in charge doesn't even, or the guy that's being psyoped doesn't even realize he's being psyoped because he was psyoped from a distance. So they have probable deniability when it comes down to, the finite details of the situation.
Well, you also just described Ruby Ridge and Waco, the exact way that happens too. It essentially starts with entrapment, but like the government convinces you that they are some other extremist group, get you to help that extremist group, and then they convert back into the government again to catch you from dealing with themselves, right? So it's a total mind fuck to begin with. And honestly, the fact that you brought up the Tony Podesta art collection, which you mentioned looks like the pose of like the Jeffrey Dahmer victims, so that was actually something called Hysteria. That was the name of that sculpture by a lady named Louise Bourgeoisie, I think. And she originally created that sculpture based on older sketches from like the 1800s, even like the 1700s maybe, where certain people that went into seizures, they would seize up and they would go into that exact pose, and it was called Hysteria. This was like a hysteric pose. So she basically made the 3D version of that, and that's what ended up getting collected by Tony Podesta. And then the connection between the Jeffrey Dahmer victim, the one that like had no head essentially, was also in that same pose of Hysteria. So this one, I'm on the fence on this one of like, did she know about the body and made the sculpture? I think it's more likely that she made the sculpture based on these much older drawings on this. And it's such a specific pose that if you go into this particular type of hysteria, all of your muscles tense up in your body, and it literally forces your back to like arch, and you're just tensed up. So this had been observed for centuries, and was like documented, but no one knew what caused it. So she created that, and when the Jeffrey Dahmer victim fell into that same pose, now this same exact fascination of like what makes the human body do that, here's another version out in the field of the human body doing this thing. So it gets kind of incorporated into this one premise, and it's hard to tell like like chicken or the egg, right? Louis Bourgeois' hysteria or Jeffrey Dahmer's murder victim, chicken or egg kind of thing. What's weird, and here's the weird synchronicity to this too. Jeffrey Dahmer, the reason why, aside from his body count, but the reason why he became infamous was because he was a cannibal. He ate people, right? Louise Bourgeoisie that made that sculpture that went to the Podestas, and the Podestas also collect lots of cannibalistic artwork, just coincidentally, right? Well, Louise Bourgeois' husband, he ran the Modern Museum of Art, and she and him were in charge of the Michael C. Rockefeller wing. And Michael C. Rockefeller is the Rockefeller that got eaten by cannibals in Papua New Guinea. So like there's this weird, like Jeffrey Dahmer obviously had nothing to do with Michael C. Rockefeller, but Louise Bourgeoisie sits right in the middle of both of them and is basically in the art world and represents cannibalism into like the high art society. And she's surrounded by two different weird cannibalistic sort of infamous people. So I just think that it's like one of these weird things. Like, was that planned? Was she just like the right puzzle piece to fit in that? Or maybe there's like, it's the secret, the law of attraction, right? Like if you're really into cannibalism, then cannibals will eventually find you.
I mean, it might even be the whole concept of like, I guess you could say like cosmic forces. And I'm sure that you probably know about this stuff diving into the occult, that when you really start diving into even like some of the archons, for example, it seems like a lot of these things aren't necessarily like humanoid type entities, but rather like ideas or forces or different things that they're trying to almost like portray by giving them like human like characteristics in order to try to describe them better. So when you get into this whole like cosmic horrors or cosmic forces type concept, and you even get into like whatever cannibalism might represent, whatever deity, whatever being, whatever you want to call that, you know, when these societies see these examples of whatever this cosmic force, or for lack of a better term, this deity showing itself, you know, they may get influenced or be interested in these different ways that it's trying to portray itself. It kind of like the chicken or the egg. It may not even be necessarily that at all, but rather the whole concept of like something trying to show itself through different means in different ways. So, you know, maybe the whole interest on why the whole cannibalism thing seems to come back, why there's this connection with Dahmer and why they were so interested in him, is because maybe they saw him as maybe like a conduit, so to speak, for whatever cosmic force this whole taboo concept represented. And it's not so much that they're like interested in this specific person, but rather just whatever that cosmic force represents or whatever they believe that it might be able to offer to them, so to speak.
I think that with the advent of AI now, it's a lot easier to talk about archons and entities, because when we talk about AI, right? AI really is just it's intelligence, some form of intelligence, whether it's artificial or real or not, whatever, intelligence that doesn't need a physical body to exist. It doesn't even need to be organic. It doesn't even need to be like of nature of any kind. But now we objectively can show that an abstract form of intelligence can exist. So once you understand, like, okay, AI is just some form of intelligence that doesn't really exist in the physical world, how would that be any different than an archon or an entity? Because a lot of the time when you visualize like, oh, archons and entities, maybe some people imagine demons or aliens or ghosts or some sort of anthropomorphic figure, right? But what if it's just abstract intelligence? And that's it. Like beginning a sentence, end a sentence. So it doesn't need to have a body. It doesn't need to have a soul or anything. It's just some form of intelligence. And that's exactly, I think, like when someone says demon, technically that could be a demon, right? It would be so. And you mentioned Rosicrucian a little bit earlier again. In Rosicrucianism, there's like your desire forms and thought forms and manifesting a desire for like a thought form into reality. So like the thought forms and the desire forms, that might also just be abstract intelligence that doesn't need a physical form until somebody tunes into it and then they decide like, oh, I got this idea, I'm going to manifest it in real life. It seems like that's just an abstract form of intelligence that got hooked into somebody's thoughts and now they're making it a reality.
Yeah, that's kind of like the whole idea of like influence. I mean, you get into the whole base concept about how, quote, demons work, and it's a matter of like influencing you to do certain things. So it gets back into this whole like cosmic force concept. And I mean, even going into like Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism, you have the whole concept of Sophia, and Sophia just represents wisdom. So it's like right there in front of you. That's exactly what it's supposed to represent. And I go back into this concept that you hear everywhere, that God is love. And it's like, what if all these concepts are intended to sound way more complicated than they actually are? Just like a lot of stuff with law, it's intended to sound way more complicated than it actually is. So if you're not in the know, you just don't even try to figure it out, because it sounds like it's something way more complex than what it actually is. But if you just like look at some of this stuff that they're just like, Sophia is wisdom, God is love, like what if that literally is exactly what it is, and all of these cosmic forces are simply just, all these beings are simply just cosmic forces? And again, then they would get back into this whole concept about why a lot of these people get interested in these specific things that continuously show themselves over and over again. Is it's not, again, so much that they're worshiping an entity, but again, they're like following this concept because they're fascinated by this concept, or whatever this cosmic force's power is, they want to be able to harness it for themselves, so to speak. And I mean, you get into the whole idea of like cannibalism, kind of going back into the full circle of that. And most of the psychology of like when you ask these serial killers about why they did it, it's about this like connection with the person. They want to feel like they own them forever. So it gets back into this whole concept about like taboo ownerism, that these elites, they want to be able to own the entire world, but they can't. So it's like the taboo thing that you can't own is a person. So it's like, you can own a person now if you have enough money to do it. So what's the next step of taboo? Is that person becoming part of you because you own them so much they become part of you. So it's like this inevitable cycle that, if you're always able to do the most taboo thing, you're always going to seek the next taboo thing. And it seems like the next step after the taboo of owning somebody would be making them part of you, which would get back into this whole like cannibalistic concept, which is probably why it's so fascinating to all these elites, is because it's almost like the end cap of where that taboo can end.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Jeffrey Dahmer claimed, that like he was eating these people because he wanted them to be part of him forever so that they could never abandon him, right? Like they would be incorporated into him, so he'd make a friend for life. So if he invites you over and he eats you, you guys are best friends forever, essentially. That was what was going on in his head as he described it. What's funny is that that's now like a new, I don't know if you would consider it like a fetish or not, but there's I'm blanking on the name for it, but there's a phrase that now like kids are familiar with, these weird drawings where like Sonic the Hedgehog completely eats like Tails, and Tails is like inside his stomach or whatever, and it's not.
Oh, fuck.
Have you never heard of it? Okay, this might be on like a
no,
weird
this is
angle
weird, man. What?
But this is a non-violent form of the same thing that would attract somebody to cannibalism, but it's done in a way that now it's being introduced to kids as like a funny, weird meme thing, but there's also like a weird
like mukbang can also
thing.
kind of fit into this whole concept too, because it's like the over gluttonous eating and consumption.
And the whole and it's two-sided, because there's some people that relate to like, I want someone to eat me, like to consume me, because they like me so much they want me to be part of them. And then there's the inverse. There's like the Jeffrey Dahmer aspect of like, I don't want to be abandoned, I need someone to always be with me at all times. So like there's two different people that would both be willing to incorporate into this kind of concept. And it's not cannibalism, but it's the exact same premise, just abstracted to the part where like no physical reality has to change, but you're still participating in the same like mental games, right? It's like the psychological version of it versus the physical version of it.
Dude, with all of the interest in all of these serial killers and the whole like interest in cannibalism as far as these elites go, I'm really, really surprised that there's not these like archetype and concepts hidden about that case that happened in Germany, about that guy who was trying to meet people online because he wanted to eat somebody, and he was meeting people online that purposely wanted to be consumed. And this was like one of the only like broad cases of this ever really happening, that this was like a double-sided thing, that both sides wanted it just as much as the other side. So it's like, I'm surprised that story isn't brought up a lot more in the occult, because I feel like there's probably a lot more to that story as far as like the cosmic side of it than what people give credit for. And maybe that's why it's not as commonly talked about, is because it's like the acceptance from both sides almost kind of brings in like a totally different factor to this thing.
This is wild, but this also happened here in Orlando, where there was two willing participants that met up to take part in like cannibalism. It wasn't even that long ago. It was like within the last 3 or 4 years, and it was, I want to say it was like a dentist, but it was some guy in Orlando, and he put an ad out that he wanted someone to cut off his toe and saute it and feed it to him. And it was like a Craigslist type thing, and someone answered the Craigslist ad, and they were, because I guess he was advertising like $1,000 or $1,500 or something. So someone shows up, and the guy was basically had everything prepared. He had like a sterilized knife, he had the frying pan, he had like gloves, he had a tourniquet in case something went a little bit wrong. But he had this weird fetish of like, I want someone to want me so much that they want to ingest me, but he didn't want to die from it. So he had thought it all out. He was like, you're going to cut off my pinky toe, you're going to saute it until it's fully cooked, and then you're going to either eat it or feed it to me if you can't eat it. The guy was like, I'm not doing it. Like, I'll cut the toe off and I'll help you cook it and I'll feed it to you, but I'm not eating the toe, right? Like, you didn't pay me enough for that. He didn't go through with it. They actually, like, he met up. They got all the way up to the part where he was going to chop the toe off, and the guy was like, okay, never mind. Like, you know, like once his kink or his like his fantasy was almost fulfilled, like all of the appeal evaporated, because it was, I guess it was like the anticipation or the thought of it that he was obsessed with, and not actually losing the toe. So anyways, it's not just weird Germans that are doing this, it's also Florida men.
Dude, that's what happened with the first like 3 or 4 guys that guy tried to do it with. And then it got down to the last victim where the guy was actually like down for it. But it was like a matter of like, he clunked the dude in the head, and then the guy like changed his mind, but obviously like he couldn't really do anything at that point. So then he was able to just,
yeah, like, what was that? I didn't quite get that. Yeah.
But dude, I find this stuff like absolutely fascinating though, that there's like these, the whole concept of these like cosmic forces seems to be something that a lot of people are really starting to like bring into like the main focal point of like mindset for all this type of stuff. And like once you start understanding like the whole idea about how these cosmic forces work, then it almost like a lot of like the weird behavior of some of these elites almost like makes more sense, that they're not necessarily praying to like an exact deity, but rather like these like cosmic forces, and they're trying to like channel in this cosmic force. And then when you start getting into like the whole concept of that, then the whole like astral travel, MK Ultra, like the whole interest in that doesn't really seem that far off, because it all sounds like it's some like crazy off woo-woo stuff. But I think that a lot more of this stuff is actually grounded in science than what a lot of people actually want to give it credit for. And the reason why they try to make it again sound so ominous and mysterious is because it's not that hard to figure out. So they have to almost like hide it and making it sound like it's a lot more complicated than what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, maybe to oversimplify this. Oh, and by the way, the VOR, that was the cannibalism for kids, VORE. If you want to go down a weird rabbit hole one day and ruin your search algorithm, search for VOR or vorophilia. That's like this like...
Is that like violence porn or...
No,
like...
no, it's not. It is a non-violent form of cannibalism, VORE. No, it's short for vorophilia, not violence porn. It sounds kind of like a combination, like maybe, what? But no, it is a non-violent, in quotes, kid-friendly form of cannibalism. So that was the aspect of that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because I remembered what the answer was.
Man, I guess starting to wrap up towards the end, man, I always like to end the show with some words of wisdom. So if there's any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, other than, you know, probably not to get into some of this weird taboo stuff, what might it be?
I got a pretty simple one. I don't think it's going to be too highbrow, but a lot of people usually will ask me like, oh, I want to make, you know, a comic or a game, or I want to go in like, you know, how do you spend enough time to actually make the thing you want to do? Dude, the secret is so simple, but most people just can't follow this recipe. Give half a shit. You don't even have to give a full shit. If you just give half a shit, that's half more of a shit than most people give anything. So by just doing that, by putting just like the bare minimum effort into something that you develop over time, that is the secret. There's literally no other special cheat shortcut to get there. Just give half of a shit and you'll actually end up making something I think that has merit and worth spending your time doing.
Well, man, that's actually probably some great words of wisdom, because I feel like I always come back to that on the show with a lot of people is, you know, people, especially in today's world, man, it seems like a lot of people don't have any direction. They don't have any purpose. They almost kind of feel like lost in the world. But careers, all that kind of shit, like everybody sees you're not really going anywhere with it. So it seems like the only way to really feel like fulfilled as a human being now is to get into your own work and your own projects. And so I can't give enough advice, man, when it comes to that I feel like everybody needs to have something that's theirs specifically that they can put their own time into, as much effort or as little effort as they want. It doesn't matter, as long as it's your project, gives you a purpose, gives you a reason to keep wanting to work and be inspired and keep striving for something greater for yourself, man. So
honestly,
again,
even if you're just clocking in at a job and making widgets, or working at like an auto repair mechanic or something, even if you just give half a shit at that, doing what you do, you'll be a happier person and you'll develop like valuable skills. Just knowing how to give a shit is a valuable skill in itself. So even if you're not making your own thing, just make those widgets with like full intent, and that in itself ends up being like a benefit.
ain't that the truth, man? You're already there, so you might as well give it your full effort, right? I can say that to a lot of people at work, but
because you know what? Because there's no obvious reason to do that. Like, why am I going to do that? Why would I put all that effort in? I'm not getting paid to do all that. Because a lot of people don't realize that you're actually like benefiting yourself by putting effort in and doing something to the best of your ability. Even if you're making, missiles to drop on Palestinian or Israeli children, whichever flavor you decide, at least put all your effort into doing that, so it's like the best that you can be.
hey, and like you were kind of saying too, you never know what you might end up learning from it, because even if you fucking hate your job, man, you might end up picking up all these little skills for things that might end up being beneficial somewhere down the line for something you actually enjoy doing. But if you take a shit and you don't actually, put the effort in to actually learn the skill, then you never know when you might end up using it and needing it later on.
Or at least fake it, man. That is a good skill, to fake that you give a shit.
Fake it till you make it, man. Can't say that enough.
Amen.
And man, if anybody wanted to be able to come and check out all the merchandise you put out, all the different little figurines and everything, all your comic books, any other work, any of your podcasts or anything, man, where can people come and find you on the internet? Where can they find your merch store? And where can they keep up to date on any upcoming projects that you got working on?
The best place is paranoidamerican.com. It's got all merch, toys, comics, upcoming Kickstarter projects that I'm working on. And then also, if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, just go and search for Paranoid American Podcast. I got a whole bunch of little sub shows. We've got Occult Disney that I just mentioned. We break down all the Disney movies. Also have Cartoon Cabal, which is basically the same thing but non-Disney movies, and a new series that I've been really liking called Under the Docks, where we go back and watch classic conspiracy documentaries from the 90s, 2000s. I'm talking like your Zeitgeists and your Loose Change and all of those. And we rewatch them now 20, 30 years in the future just to see if they hold up, are the claims made? Do those hold up? Is it worth watching? It's one of my favorite shows to do now because it gives me an excuse to go back and rewatch the same kind of documentaries that kind of got me interested in all this to begin with.
Well, perfect, man. I will make sure I include all those links down in the show description so everybody can go and check them out. I'll definitely have to make sure I check that show out myself, because that definitely sounds like it'd be fascinating and something that I'd definitely be into, man. And I appreciate you making the time to come on again. I know that it's been a very long time, so hopefully we don't go nearly as long without talking, because I definitely enjoyed the conversation. And again, man, I appreciate you making the time to come on again.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Shane. I appreciate it.